This will be a short video by way of an update on the situation in Ukraine, a public holiday. Briefly, the focus of this programme will be certain comments which were made by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson whilst in New Delhi. Now, I've mentioned before that Boris Johnson, over the course of his trip to New Delhi, seemed to concede the possibility that Ukraine might lose the war. This was based on a single article that was headlined in the Financial Times, but which I have to say didn't stay there for a huge amount of time, at least not as a headline article. The rest of the British media essentially ignored this story and didn't report in detail Johnson's words. But MS Badra, who is of course an Indian diplomat and is presumably based in New Delhi and is familiar with what is actually said in New Delhi, has now provided a more detailed account of Johnson's words, and they go considerably further than I had expected or had realised. Anyway, this is what Badra reports or quotes Johnson as having said. I think that the sad thing is that Russian victory is a realistic possibility. Yeah, of course, Putin has a huge army. He has a very difficult political position. The only option he has now is to continue to try to use his appalling, grinding approach, led by artillery, trying to grind the Ukrainians down. He's very close to securing a land bridge in Mariupol now. The situation is, I'm afraid, unpredictable. We just have to be realistic about that. Now, notice that Johnson's analysis, which is surely based on information provided by British intelligence, essentially confirms what I was saying in my previous video, and what indeed others have been saying as well, that the major focus of the Russians at the moment is on destroying the Ukrainian army in Donbass. Well, I've been saying this for weeks, and that the primary instrument that they're using at the moment is massive, sustained artillery fire. It is, as Johnson says, appalling, grinding approach. Well, appalling is his conception, led by artillery, trying to grind the Ukrainians down. On the topic of Mariupol, I would argue that with the entire city essentially under Russian control, apart from the Azovstal factory, that the Russians have in effect already obtained that land bridge to Crimea that Boris Johnson is talking about. With the fighters in Azovstal bottled up, there's been apparently another offer made to them today, that's to say Monday, to come out and surrender with a humanitarian pause instituted for them to do so. Anyway, we'll see whether or not they avail themselves of it. But with these troops, such as they are, bottled up in the Azovstal factory, by their own admission, running out of food and completely out of medical supplies, I don't see that these troops in Azovstal are in any position to interfere with the operation of a land bridge. Johnson had more to say, by the way, about the political situation, if you like, the diplomatic situation. He said, or at least he's quoted by Badra as saying, I'm sure Badra is right, that there has to be a setting out a vision for the future of Ukraine in the security architecture of Europe. Where does Ukraine fit in now? And he went on to say that a collection of security guarantees from like-minded countries, security commitments about what we can do to back them up with weaponry, with training, and with intelligence sharing might be on offer, but then he went on to say that this cannot be like an Article 5 NATO guarantee. So that looks like if the British and the Western powers do give Ukraine some kind of security guarantees as part of an overall settlement, it will be far less than the kind of security guarantees that Ukraine is seeking. So all very different from what we're reading about in the British media, or have been reading about in most of the British media. As I said, there's been one or two minor articles in a few places that do sometimes give glimmers of the truth, but clearly Johnson is far better informed about the conflict in Donbass than he's publicly saying, at least while he's in Britain, and than the British government is saying, and then Western governments are saying. And in fact, and in reality, the situation in Donbass is, as I discussed in my previous video, and has been confirmed by Boris Johnson, that the Ukrainian army there is being ground down under massive artillery fire, with some reports, by the way, that the Russians are preparing their general offensive and that they could be launching that within several days now, presumably once Ukrainian forces in Donbass have been so severely damaged that they are not really in a position to put up the kind of resistance that they might otherwise have done. I don't know, by the way, I want to stress again, I don't know whether that is the Russian timetable. As I've said many times, the Russian military doesn't share its plans with me. I can only try to guess what they are from the actual events. In the meantime, I would say that there's been more information coming out of the fighting in Donbass. The Russians have been capturing more villages and settlements. They're coming ever closer to the main concentration of Ukrainian troops in the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk area. The forces in Severodonetsk are clearly, the Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk are clearly finding their position increasingly precarious. As I discussed in my video yesterday, there continue to be rumors of a pullback by Ukrainian forces from Severodonetsk, and overnight the Russians again stepped up missile strikes all over Ukraine, this time targeting railway stations and oil refineries. There's been, by the way, an oil refinery fire in Russia at a place called Bryansk. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have commented in any detail about it, but there's some speculation, which could be true, that this was some kind of a sabotage attempt carried out by Ukraine, in which case all I could say is it's a fairly desperate attempt to try to perhaps dissuade the Russians from more attacks on Ukrainian oil refineries and oil installations, which the Russians are not going to do. And we've had confirmation, indirect confirmation, that Ukraine is indeed running out of oil, in the form of pictures now of long trains coming from Moldova, full of oil tanks, presumably to try to help Ukraine with its pending fuel crisis, its ongoing fuel crisis. I would say that these trains are obvious targets, and I suspect that the attacks on railway stations are partly directed against them. It's not only railway stations, by the way, that the Russians are attacking. They're attacking all sorts of other installations as well, but I'm going to discuss that more fully in further programs. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the situation in Ukraine today. Today being, as I said, still part of the Orthodox Easter holidays, but we can see that Boris Johnson clearly is aware of the deteriorating picture for the Ukrainian military in Donbass and is obviously worried and concerned about it. Badrakuma, by the way, claims that whilst he was in Kiev, Johnson actually gave the Ukrainians person to person the same advice that I gave them in my video yesterday, which is to pull their troops back from Donbass towards more defensible lines, advice which the Ukrainians have obviously refused. Well, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I'm sure that Badrakuma has good sources. As I said, he is a well-known commentator in India itself. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say today. More from me soon. Have a good day. Until then.